Welcome to my random camera thoughts and opinions that aren't worthy of their own separate videos. This was going to be more of a podcast style video, but then I remembered I'm way too untalented to do a video like this without massive edits hiding my mistakes. But if this does miraculously become podcast worthy, then maybe it could serve as a pilot or test run for something bigger. Now, I wanted to be more consistent and post weekly on both channels, but then I realized that's just not possible because some video ideas fall through and I just don't have a backup plan for that week. Over the past 3 weeks, I had worked on a Canon 90D versus Sony a6600 video, but about halfway through the edit I realized that the gap between the video I want to put out into the world and the video I was destined to put out into the world was just too wide. How about I use that as a segue into my first topic, the Canon 90D versus the Sony a6600. The overarching theme with this comparison is that the 90D wins in the color and usability departments while the a6600 wins in the sharpness department. Truthfully, I care more about detail than anything else because I could always adjust color in post, but I can't add more detail in post. So I shoot just about everything with the a6600 now, despite the tedious Sony workflow that I've had to adopt that I definitely didn't need with Canon. The a6600 is also impressive in low light, whereas the 90D is noisy in low light. But this leads to one of the reasons I decided not to make a formal comparison video. I use different kit lenses for each camera and should note that the one I used for the 90D opens to an aperture of f4, whereas the one I used for the a6600 opens to f3.5. Comparing the image quality of two different cameras is unfair unless you're using equivalent lenses. Speaking of Sony, let's talk about the camera everyone's going goo goo gaga over. The Sony A1. Full frame, 50 megapixels, 8K 30, 4K 120, 30 frames per second still shooting burst. Based on those numbers and the sentiment of those who were lucky enough to review the camera, I think we're finally approaching the point where we're actually becoming satisfied with the standard of specs that cameras come with. Of course, knowing the camera community, there will still be a large chunk of people that will demand the next frontier of specs. Perhaps a future in which the standard is medium format instead of full frame. As processing power in cameras improves, will sensors just keep getting bigger, or will frames per second just keep improving? Or will this create diverging technologies where you have big sensor enthusiasts shooting with 100 megapixel oversampled 8K 30 medium format cameras and the slow motion enthusiasts shooting with 50 megapixel 4K 240 full frame cameras? Either way, given what I know about the camera community, I'm guessing one of those is the more likely future than one in which creators focus on their storytelling skills, which one could argue is the most important skill in any visual medium. That said, I will withhold my snarky comments about the fact that the Sony A1 was tested by so many vloggers instead of the professional photographers the camera was actually made for. Ignoring the fact that some vloggers have massive influence that appeals to giant corporations looking to transform their worldly items into cold hard cash, vloggers are storytellers, so it makes sense that they would get their hands on the camera before most other people would. And about who the camera is aimed for, I disagree with those claiming this is a Canon R5 killer, even though the A1 does seem to outperform the R5. The Sony A1's $6,500 price tag and absence of a flip-out screen indicates it's likely intended to compete with the rumored Canon R1. And I would love the masses to have a debate about flippy screens in the comments, except that this place doesn't have masses. But I will give my opinion as someone who strongly prefers cameras with flip-out screens, which is, the Sony A1 is not for me, so I am not triggered by the fact that it does not have a flip-out screen. If I ever bought a camera like this, it would be solely for behind-the-camera work. Now, personally, I'm a hybrid shooter, and the Sony A1 is arguably the best hybrid camera out there, considering the way it combines its photo and video capabilities. But it's not a hybrid vlogging camera, and I'm a hybrid vlogging shooter, which leads me to my next topic. My ideal camera. I've spent my entire camera life using cropped sensors, most recently the Canon 90D and Sony a6600. I'm approaching the point where it's time to make the jump to a full-frame camera so I could finally know firsthand if the hype is worth the price. When I look at the specs of the a7 III and the a7C and compare the prices to what I pay for the a6600, I sometimes wonder if I should have went with one of those full-frame options. Of course, when going full-frame, it's not always the price of the body that gets you, it's the price of the lenses. Because supposedly, in order to take advantage of the quality of a full-frame sensor, you need to buy the sharper glass, and in the Sony system, the native ones don't come cheaply. Plus, when you take into consideration how outdated the a7 III and a7C are, even though one of those just came out, if you're a hybrid vlogging shooter like myself, then it's probably best to remain patient and wait for the anticipated Sony a7 IV that will hopefully come out this year. If that thing has a flip-out screen with no video record limit and comes in at under $2,500, I might have to inch closer to the fanboy status that other content creators have slipped into. Right now, I consider myself a brand agnostic who's in limbo between Canon and Sony, waiting for one of them to win this era of camera wars. And with that, I'd like to know some of your thoughts. What do you think of the cameras I brought up in this video? The Canon 90D, the Sony a6600, the Sony A1, the Canon R1, the Sony a7 IV. I believe I also brought up the a7 III and a7C. What are you looking for in your next camera? Do you have one ideal camera, or does your kit require more than one camera? Do you even care about this type of video where I just talk about cameras the way those camera news channels do? Or are you just here to see pictures and videos that are not of my face?